Hello everyone, I am K. Rashmiraj from Tribly. Today I am discussing about listening process. Most of what we do in the writing center is listen. But there is a difference between hearing and understanding the words someone is saying and listening to their message. Listening to your writers and your co-workers is vital to maintaining good conservation and avoiding misunderstandings that might lead to unnecessary conflict. The listening process involves four stages: receiving, understanding, evaluating, and responding. Basically, an effective listener must hear and identify the speech sounds directed towards them, understand the message of those sounds, critically evaluates or assess that message, remembering what has been said, and respond to information that have received. Effectively engaging with all five stages of listening process, let us best gather the information we need from others. Next, receiving. Paired with hearing, attending is the other half of the receiving stage in the listening process. Attending is the process of accurately identifying and interpreting particular sound we hear as words. The sounds we hear have no meaning until we give them their meaning in context. Listening is an active process that constructs meaning from both verbal and non-verbal messages. Understanding. The second stage in the listening process is the understanding stage. Understanding our comprehensions is shared meaning between practice in a communication transition and constitutes the first step in the listening process. This is the stage during which the listener determines the context and meaning of the words he or she hears. Determining the context and meaning of individual words as well as assigning message in language is essential to understanding sentences. This in turn is essential to understanding a speaker's message. Now, before getting the big picture of a message, it can be difficult to focus on what the speaker is saying. In the writer center, you and your writer may have trouble understanding each other if you have different accents, if the writer is struggling with language fluency, or if the space is very noisy. One tactic for different understanding a speaker's meaning is to ask questions. Asking questions allows you as the listener to fill in any holes you may have in mental destruction of the speaker's message. And next, evaluating. During the evaluation stage, the listener determines whether or not the information they heard and understand from the speaker is well constructed or disorganized, based or unbased, true or false, significant or insignificant. They are ascertain how and why the speaker has become up with and conveyed the message that they delivered. This may involve considerations of a speaker's personal or professional motivations and goals. For example, a listener may determine that a coworker forgetting to clean off their table is factually correct, but may also understand that the coworker's child is sick and that may be putting them on edge. A voter who listens to and understands the points made in a political cabinet stump speech can decide whether or not those points were conveying enough to at their vote. Next, the evaluation stage occurs most effectively once the listener fully understands what the speaker is trying to say. While we can and sometimes do from opinions of information and ideas that we don't fully understand or even that we misunderstand, doing so is not often ideal in the long run. Having a clear understanding of a speaker's message allows a listener to evaluate that message without getting dob- dodged down in ambiguous or spending unnecessary time and energy addressing points that may be tangentially or otherwise non necessarily. Responding. The responding stage is the stage of the listening process in which the listener provides verbal and non-verbal reactions. A listener can respond to what they hear either verbally or non-verbally. Non-verbal signals can include gestures such as nodding, make eye contact, tapping a pen, fidgeting, scratching or cracking their necks, smiling, rolling their eyes, grimming, or any other body languages. These kinds of responses can be displayed purposely or involuntarily. Responding verbally might involve asking a question, requesting additional information, redirecting or changing the focus of a conversation, cutting off a speaker, or repeating what a speaker has said back to their in order to verify that the received message matches the intended message. Next, nonverbal responses like nodding or eye contact allow the listener to communicate their level of interest without interpreting the speaker, thereby preserving the speaker or listener roles. When a listener responds verbally to what they hear and remember, for example, with a question or a comment, the speaker listener roles are reversed, at least momentarily. Responding adds action to the listening process. Oftentimes, the speaker looks for verbal and non-verbal responses for the listener to determine if and how their message is being understood and are considered. Based on the listener's response, the speaker can choose to either adjust or continue with the delivery of her message. For example, if a listener's brow is furrowed and their arms are crossed, the speaker may determine that she needs to lighten their tone to better communicate their point. If a listener is smiling and nodding or asking questions, the speaker may feel that the listener is engaged and her message is being communicated effectively. And next, barriers to effective listening. Low concentration. Low concentration or not paying close attention to speaker is physiological is detrimental to effective listening. It can result for various physiological or physical situations such as visual or auditory distractions, physical discomfort, inadequate volume, lack of interest in the subject materials, stress or physical bias, regardless of the case. When a listener is not paying attention to a speaker's dialogue, effective communication is significantly diminished. Now, lack of prioritization. Just as lack of attention to deal in a conversation can lead to ineffective listening, so can focusing too much attention on the least important information. Listeners need to be able to pick up on social causes and prioritize the information they hear to identify the most important points within the context of the conversation. Often, the information the audience needs to know is delivered along the less parented or irrelevant information. When listeners give equal weight to everything they hear, it makes it difficult to organize and retain the information they need. For instance, students who take notes in class must know which information is worth writing down within the context of an entire lecture. Writing down the lecture word for word is impossible as well as inefficient. Next, poor judgment. When listening to a when listening to a speaker's message, it is common to sometimes overlook aspects of the conversation or make judgments before all of the information is presented. Listeners often engage in confirmation bias, which is the tendency to isolate aspects of a conversation to support one's own pre-existing beliefs and values. The physiological process has a determinantal effect on listening for several reasons. First, confirmation bias tends to cause listener to enter the conversation before the speaker finishes her message and thus from opinions without first obtaining all retention information. Second, confirmation bias distracts for a listener ability to make accurate critical assignments. For example, a listener may hear something at the beginning of a speech that arouses a specific emotion, whether anger, frustration, or anything else like angerness. This emotion could have a profound impact on the listener's perception of the rest of the conversation. And next, active listening guidelines. First, the guidelines of the active listening is first put the focus of attention on the speaker, not and do not occupy our mind with our own thoughts and feelings. And paraphrase and clarity. We must need the clarity to for the active listening. And next, summarize. We have to summarize the topic and what was saying by that speaker. Don't discuss your own reactions or give well intended comments like I know what you mean. Oh yeah, yeah, what that sometime happened to me, or I don't agree because this is not a time to articulate your own viewpoints or turn the attention back to yourself. This caused the speaker to conclude his thought and its communication. Don't ignore the speaker's feelings because he would get anger, and don't pretend that you understand their meaning. If you don't, it's perfectly fine to ask for clarification or any queries. You can ask that speaker, for example, what did you mean by, or can you tell me more about. And don't ignore the non-verbal contact like people's body language, facial expressions, gestures, pitch, tone can give you just about what they are thinking and feeling inner. Don't think about what you will say next. Probably the hardest guidelines is to follow. It seems it is so our default response when we are getting into a rather heated conversation with somebody. We are just holding our breath until we can get a chance to insert our opinion, and that is the positive uh, opish of active listening. And I have to refresh. And then the listening process involves four stages, and we have discussed these four stages like receiving, understanding, evaluating, and responding. In these four stages, the understanding and responding and receiving are the basic steps, because we have to first we have to understand the speaker thought, and then we have to respond after finishing of the speaker's thought. And basically an effective listener must hear first and then identify the speech sounds directed towards them from the speaker, understand the message of those sounds, critically evaluate or assess that message, remember what's been said, and respond either verbally or non-verbally. Verbally uh, is a good way that we have to communicate to others, but non-verbal signs would catch the speaker disconnect and default with. We have to increase our relationships with a good manner effectively engaging with all five steps of the listening process. Let we have discussed this all five steps, and now I am concluding my presentation, thanking you, signing off, Rashmiraj.